It's been a busy week for the Scottish National Party now. The country's draft budget was set out by its finance minister with huge changes to council funding. Next week doesn't look like it'll be any quieter as well, with Nicola Sturgeon planning this First Minister to set out Scotland's Brexit plan. Well, the former First Minister, now the SNP's international spokesman, of course, Alex Salmond, has just got back from Brussels and he joins me now. A very good morning to you, Mr. Salmond. And where should we start? Let's start then. You just got back from Brussels. And you've been given an honour, I know. You've also been told that Scotland will have some kind of hearing, some kind of seat at the negotiations. Can you give us any more idea what form that'll take?
Well, what Jean-Claude Juncker said is that Scotland had earned the right to be heard in Europe and the right to be listened to in Brussels. That was his public statement, and I thought that was a very effective one, as I would expect from President Juncker.
How would you interpret that, though, right to be heard? I mean, you know, you can go in and have a conversation and then Westminster representatives come in the room after you and go, well, we represent the entirety of the UK, you don't have to listen to Scotland.
Well, of course, Westminster representatives can't do that at the present moment. I know for a fact that David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, has been trying to meet President Juncker for months, but the position of the European Commission is obviously they're not going to have that discussion until after Article 50 is invoked and into a formal negotiations. So Westminster representatives aren't walking into any room in Brussels at the present moment, and when the Prime Minister's in rooms in Brussels, then nobody will speak to her.
So maybe they could do with using the good offices of you SNP members who seem to have been given what you're telling me, Mr. Salmond, is you're getting a more sympathetic hearing and better access.
Well, let me make this formal offer to the UK government. We'll do our best to facilitate their contact with other European leaders. But, of course, the reason there's tension between Westminster and the rest of Europe's obvious. Firstly, that they've were embarked on this disastrous Brexit proposal, and secondly, Westminster doesn't even have a strategy as to how to do it. I mean, I listened to Liam Fox on the Andrew Marr show this morning, and he said that the government was proceeding methodically. Well, there must be some method in the madness, because it seems to me, and to everybody else on this continent, they're going round in circles.
And give us a sense, Mr. Salmond, of what Scotland is going to ask for. It's very clear you want not just access to the single market, you want continual membership of that single market. How do you square that circle then? If the rest of the UK, if the entirety of the UK leaves the European Union, and depending on the way the negotiations go, it is announced by the EU, by the other 27, well, you're not having that access. What does Scotland do? What are your contingency plans?
Well, you're right to make the distinction between access to the single marketplace, which everybody in the world has. The Patagonian Association of Shoe Manufacturers have access to the single market, and membership of it, which is the crucial thing, which only 600 million people in this planet have, and that's a huge economic advantage the UK shouldn't give up. So when Nicola Sturgeon unveils her strategy this week, the first UK leader to have a strategy, then she'll be saying three things. One, we want the UK to stay within the single marketplace. If that's not possible and the government rules that out, we want Scotland to stay within the single marketplace as part of a special deal and arrangement. And if that argument is dismissed, swept aside contemptuously by Westminster, then the First Minister of Scotland has made it clear that it's very likely there'll be an independence referendum within the next 2 years.
Just let me ask you this technical point, because we will be hearing the decision of the Supreme Court on Article 50 in the new year. If it does decide that the government has to give Parliament, has to give MPs some kind of say in that triggering, would it be your interpretation that the Scottish Parliament also has a right to have a debate and a vote on the triggering of Article 50?
Well, the Scottish Parliament can debate and vote regardless of what the Supreme Court says. But of course, one of the points at issue in the Supreme Court is whether the government requires a legislative consent motion. That's a formal process of approval from the Scottish Parliament. And we'll just have to leave that to the Supreme Court as to what they want to decide. The Lord Advocate's arguments, in my view, were very persuasive, Scotland's senior law officer. But it seems likely, and the general opinion is, that the Supreme Court are going to send it back for legislation in the Westminster Parliament. And then I think if the government continues in this chaotic way, then I think things are going to get very interesting and very hot for Theresa May and her government. Note this morning, of course, we've had the first sign in the opinion poll this morning that people across the UK are starting to prioritise maintenance of the single marketplace over control of immigration. And in Scotland, of course, the majority is massive. It's 2 or 3 to 1.
And a couple of quick questions on the Scottish budget last week. Mr Mackay, your finance minister, acting like a Tory chancellor, according to Kezia Dugdale for the Labour Party, and they've cut, what, £327 million from local councils?
And acting like a rampant socialist, according to the Tories, because we've asked people who are a bit better off in Scotland to pay a bit more in council tax to help fund public services. I think it was an excellent budget from Derek Mackay. And I note in that same opinion poll, and it was only a subsample, of course, but the Scottish subsample showed the SNP at 56%. Now, I don't know if that's correct or not, but it's an indication that the SNP still have massive support across Scotland, that the Tory and Labour parties combined can't even match.
But do you not feel on the issue of income tax, slight variation now coming, you haven't used the full powers to put up taxes formally, but not following the rest of the UK and the movement of the threshold for paying the 40% rate. As that widens, is that not going to be a difficulty hanging on to some fairly skilled and managerial people?
No, I think that's a better way to ask people who are comfortably off in society, who earn a bit more, to contribute a bit more to public services. That's a far better way than doing it through the headline rate, which tends to be indiscriminate in its effects, as is the change in the council tax bands to make them more progressive. I think that's a better way to proceed. Remember, the Scottish National Party for the last 10 years, and I think absolutely rightly, have pursued the policy of the social wage. So there's all sorts of rights and entitlements in Scotland: free education, no bridge tolls, free personal care for the elderly that every single person in society gets, which makes Scotland a highly attractive place to live in for all sections of society. But in that context, I think it's right and proper you ask people who are a bit better off to pay a bit more to fund public services, and that's what Derek Mackay did.
And just lastly, Mr Salmond, your view on the year ahead. I've been asking people that internationally. We know about your thoughts about President-elect Trump. You voiced them in the past. You said he's unfit to be president. You actually said he's a sociopath. Should we start digging the bunkers?
Well, let me say, I think it was probably more useful for Scotland this week that I was meeting President Jean-Claude Juncker than President-elect Donald Trump. I think it'd be reasonably say I've got more in common with the Jean-Claude than the Donald.
And on that note, thank you very much indeed, Mr Salmond.
And Merry Christmas, Dermot.
Yeah, and a happy Hogmanay.